Hello and welcome to this episode of Video Shamanism. I am Alex Lipton and I'm here with John Allen, and we're going to get into a really cool subject today that we've talked about on previous episodes. And before we get into that, I just want to remind everybody about the essence of what an Isumatak is and a shaman is to hold a sacred space for wisdom to be revealed. And John and I were talking about activism a little bit before before we started going live here, and activism being like, okay, well, what could we do to make a difference in this world? And came up with like, okay, well, sometimes it's not about doing stuff. Sometimes we do too much, or it's so overwhelming we don't know what to do. It's about who you are and everything like that. So Isumatakism, shamanism, comes back to that thing. It's about just holding that sacred space, like a tree. You know, a tree is planted firmly in the ground. And I was at the Unity concert in the Black Hills just this past weekend, and they mentioned how trees are the original cloud of planet Earth, where they are the long-standing witnesses. The Lakota actually call them the silent standing nation. They've literally stood in one place for periods of time, like the redwoods especially, and absorbed everything around them and just downloaded information. And our neurons in our brain actually look like little trees with the branches and the roots. So, you know, if you're having memory issues or anything like that, go sit by a tree, go back to where you came from and sit by those trees and just download the information directly from the cloud of planet Earth. So yes, we're here, we're holding the sacred space, and I want to bring John Allen onto the show. Thank you so much for being here, John.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for having me. Another excellent intro again. Got me all jazzed up to talk to you as always. I always love a good tree metaphor, so that's a great way to start. Got a tree here on my arm, and we're all trees. So yeah, I like it. Let's go from there. Let's wave in the wind and see what we can catch.
Yeah. So we mentioned how this talk, we wanted to talk about Mandala, and I guess a good way to start maybe is a general definition of what a mandala is. And I'm sure there are many definitions, but to me, a mandala is like it's a circle. It's a complete representation of the universe, of everything within and without, and it's got like a mirror to the cosmos. And it's interesting with Mandala, the story that we've been working on, which we can get into. It has a lot to do with music, and it's a thriller about conspiracy and rock and roll and all sorts of really good stuff in there. Work us up into some bigger, deeper concepts that we've been working in our minds for a long time. And I remember, just as a little sidebar, because I saw your tree tattoo, when we were writing Mandala, or when you were writing Mandala and we were developing the story at the house, the Deer Hunter was one of our like number one go-to bands that we resonated with. And I remember before the Act 3 came out, which has that tree on it, before that came out, and we were looking forward to it for a long time. I remember like weeks leading up to the actual release of that, on my college notebooks, I was drawing that tree, the tree of Yggdrasil, or the tree and the roots. And we really had some experiences. So the previous Deer Hunter album. So I remember when the album finally came out and I saw the logo on the front album, it had that tree on it, which I've been drawing, and you have it on your arm now. And the first song on that album was Writing on the Walls, which we were deep into at that point at the house. So it was like, talk about like an ultimate, like, holy shit, of course the synchronicities are with us.
Yeah, that was an exceptional moment. I think I'd stepped out for a little bit to do something, and then I came back and you're like, dude, the album's out. Act 3 is out, and look at the album cover, and then guess what the name of the first song is, and then you played it, and it was just like, it was ridiculous, but not ridiculous at the same time, that it was just so synchronistic and kind of brought everything together at the same time with the band, who was basically our choir, you know, one of the main bands that we had been listening to while talking about Mandala and while writing on the walls and while doing every other piece of crazy thing that we did there. But yeah, it was almost too perfect, but yeah, just another prime example of a ridiculous synchronicity that we've encountered together. So very good.
Yeah, very good indeed. And so I guess a good way to start off here, we were kind of pre-gaming about how to break this down for the discussion, would be how we first even found out about this. So let's, for all of our audience listeners out there, Mandala was the way I first heard about this. There's a story. I was my Uncle Bruce was visiting down here in Oceanside, and we're all hanging out outside and chatting and I went back. It was nighttime. I went inside to go to the bathroom or do something, and I came back as Uncle Bruce was telling this story, which I didn't hear the beginning of, and he was just going off about this like movie about this government controlled rock show that toured the world using vaccines and inoculating the population and just like basically doing this whole mind control experiment using this like modern day Beatles kind of band, or I guess Genesis, like Phil Collins type band, because that's what inspired him to do this. But I didn't see that's, I'm going ahead of myself here because I didn't know that part. So he's telling this great movie idea, and then he gives the punchline to the movie. And as I'm walking out, I'm just like, oh my God, like, what is this movie? When does it come out, or where can I see it? And Uncle Bruce just looks at me and goes, it's not out. I wrote that. I wrote this movie. And I just like, just the blood rushed. I just stomach dropped like, what? You wrote this? And he's like, yeah, I have it with me right now. So he sent me, and then he wrote a treatment for it back in 1981. It was back when he was doing his genetic engineering experiments, working in a science lab and working and he had gone to a Genesis concert, which is funny. It was Genesis, right? So it's like a very interesting synchronicity there, which is the name Genesis. And he had this experience watching Phil Collins just organize everyone in the audience to clap, and just getting everyone to clap in the syncopated clapping experience. And Uncle Bruce saw how like one person and the music can just like basically control the masses just by vibration. And then suddenly this whole movie idea just downloaded into his head. And as he was in the lab, he started writing this movie idea, turned it into a treatment. At that time, told it to me. I read it, and it blew my fucking mind. And that was it, man. That's where it all started. And when we were in college, brought it up to you, and you were working on writing screenplays, and I told you, I'm like, you should write this. We should turn this into a thing. I want you to write this, and we can develop it into a story and adapt it into a modern day telling. And that was it, man. That's how it all started.
Yeah, that was exceptional, and it was another thing that had great timing to it because I was more veering into writing at that time, and we were coming up on our thesis, our senior thesis, and at that point, everybody had to make their own movie. Basically, that was, at film school, it's like, all right, your senior thesis will be a movie, whether it's 10, 20, 30 minutes long, whatever. I don't think anybody was expected to make a full-length film, but I had at that point veered away from like the on-set kind of stuff. I wasn't a huge fan of like how movies were made. I was more of the story, and then I liked editing too, but I wasn't really like on set. I didn't really like that. I kind of figured that out along the way, and I was like, I really just like writing. I really just like creating a world and an environment and these people and these situations. And then the first semester where they allowed somebody to write a full-length screenplay as their thesis instead of making a movie was our semester as a senior, or our first semester as a senior. And I was writing some other elaborate, just something that was super complicated and just all these things going on and trying to be too cool. And just like, I remember writing this first draft and then reading it for our in front of our class, and they were just like interesting, but there's a lot going on there. And then right around the same time, you were like, you had already talked to me about Mandala. I was very aware of it. And then you were like, well, how about you just write it? How about you take it, and then we start going down this path. But you basically, it was just perfect timing, because I was like, this amazing story just fell into my lap. Like all of the right plot points are there, and everything was waiting for me. It was just a matter of modernizing it and then adding our twist to it, because it was only a 30-page treatment, I believe, at the time, written in 1981, and at this point it was 2008. So a lot had happened, between 1981 and 2008. The world had changed quite a bit. So it was just perfect, and I was exceptionally honored. I still always remember when you asking me to write it, instead of, you weren't just like, hey, let's write this together. You were like, you take this, we'll talk about it, and then you write it. So I was just like, this is almost too good to be true for me. So I just had all the skeleton there. I had the blueprints, and then I turned that into my thesis project. And the first draft that I wrote for that, but we would always talk about it. You know, I still have the first recordings on a little tape recorder. We talk about it for hours and hours and hours. Then I'd go write, come back, you'd read it, we talk about it. I'd go back and I'd write it. But the very first draft was for my thesis for Columbia, our school. So I didn't really get any feedback from our teachers. I remember one of our teachers, our editing teacher, kind of gave me a huge feedback where he told us to erase a lot of the background. Yeah, exactly. That was a huge note. He's like, this is great, but you don't need any of this backstory. So we erased 30 pages right away. But also us going through that process, we know so much more about these people and these characters. We wrote 30 pages that are never going to be in the movie, but they still exist within the story. So yeah, so the first draft we wrote in 2008 and handed it in for school credit. And then since then we're on the 11th draft right now. So almost 10 years into it. Yeah, we've had kind of waves of going quicker, and I've had waves of going quicker and being more into it. But then we've, Alex and I lived together for a while, and then we didn't live together, and then we lived together again for a while, and then we haven't lived together for a while. So it was obviously a lot easier to brainstorm when somebody's in the next room. But yeah, it's been a hell of a ride, but it's gone through a lot of different versions, but it's stayed the same. But yeah, it's always on my mind. Always on my mind. It'll forever be a part of me now. So until we birth it into real life.
Yeah. And
we're always thinking about it.
We are. How could we not? How could we forg? I you know what? I should, while we're on here, actually, that just reminded me, I've got the pictures from the house. I think I've got that picture of the Mandala door, because we as we talked about in the last episode or so, we would draw on the house, on the walls and everything. And oh, is it right here, right in the front? And we dedicated a door in the closet by the bathroom, dedicated.
It was the door directly outside of my bedroom door. So right when I opened up my bedroom door, this was the door right in front of me. And it got designated the Mandala door one day. I'm not sure who initiated it. I think it was you, from what I remember. But yeah.
That's here it is. Okay, so I'm gonna do a little wrong picture. I'll do a screen grab, screen share of this. And just the reason what made me think of doing this was, like, it's always on our mind. Like you said, it's always on your mind. It's always thinking about it. Same with me. And I said, how could we forget it? But that was funny, because I'll do the screen share now. So can you see it?
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, so this is the door as it was right before we painted it up, and in the center there is a diagram of what I kind of manifested as the fabric, which was the original production company logo of at the time for what I was doing. And so it was a mandala of sorts, the circle with the diagram of everything that I thought would encompass the universe. And at the top, you've got remember the fabric. And on the bottom, it says, how can I forget? But it was hilarious. I wrote the remember the fabric part, and then I wrote, how could I forg? And like stopped writing it, literally forgot to write it, the rest of forget. And it was like that for, I feel like, a long time. And I didn't even know, I feel like I didn't even notice that for a long time. And then you just probably came up to me. It's like, dude, Alex, look at this. Like, how could I forg? It's like, I literally got the fabric as I was writing it. So talk about like the synchronicity of it. And we were talking about previously before we broadcasted about, life and just experiences of being in the moment and learning like what is important about life, and just kind of life comes about you. It's like the subconscious programs. We're literally programmed, and we forget about this stuff. So it's talk about extremely ironic. I mean, it's more than ironic. It's synchronistic that as writing in that mandala, forgetting as I was writing forward, you know, and it just, it's a beautiful little synchronicity mandala within a mandala of what happened to that.
Yeah, that was perfect. And it's weird because I do forget about Mandala. Like, it always feels like an ace in my pocket, you know, because it's such an amazing project and such an incredible story, that we've made our own, that we're just, is part of us now. And I live, you know, partially in that world and partially in this world. And I'm always trying to take things from here and figure out how I can make that world better. But it is easy to forget. Like, I live in Milwaukee now, and, you know, we when we lived together, it was a lot easier to remember what was going on in all of our projects and how passionate we are and were about things. But being away from a lot of creative people, like, I don't really surround myself with a lot of people who are pursuing artistic endeavors, not a lot of writers or artists, or, I mean, there are a couple of painters and whatever, but, like, it's not like in conversation. You know, we would always talk about this stuff. So it is really easy for me to forget now, but then I have to, you know, remind myself. And then when I do remember about it, it's like, it excites the shit out of me, because this is definitely the best thing that I've ever been part of. It's still got a long way to go, but I think we're coming along really well. Like I said, we're on the 11th draft now. And I think this one, it took a big turn, because, so not only do Alex and I continually work on it, but the people that we've had around us, our other good friends and other roommates in the past, have also, like, listened to us talk about it. So they know a lot about the story as well. And they give their input every now and then. Just because they have to listen to us talk about it. They have no choice, you know, and we're just so giddy about it. They're just like, all right, well, yeah, this is interesting. So, and then I think it was our buddy Mike Mayer who kind of gave the most recent major note, I think, which was very symbolistic of the way the world is going these days, and how kind of powers are shifting and mentalities are shifting. But I'm not sure. I wasn't there the night where you and him, I think you were in the Hollywood house, where you're talking about the main character, who has been notoriously, we renamed, it used to be Phil Cotter after Phil Collins, but we changed it to Francis Bacon, who was always a male. And then you and Mayor were talking one night. I'm not sure how it went down, but if you want to tell that little tidbit, I think this is the best thing that's happened to the story in a long, long time.
Yeah, I think that ultimate insight Mike gave to us was that Francis Bacon should be a woman. And we always, part of the writing process was very fundamental just to get to know the characters even before we wrote character descriptions, which we still have a lot of work to do, it was to come up with some sort of template actors that could portray these characters so we can kind of be somewhat familiar with people. So we always envisioned James Franco to be Phil Cotter, but then I remember there was that night at the house, we realized we have to change this name, Phil Cotter. That's too on the nose, too Phil Collins-esque. It just sounded goofy, like Phil Cotter. So we did some research into like what would be a good name, and Francis Bacon came about because looking into, I think it was a documentary that Chris Sertich actually showed to me, which is called The New Atlantis, and it's all about Francis Bacon, Sir Francis Bacon, the Enlightenment thinker, and he came up with the scientific method, and there's a whole movement of thought that considers him and a group of other playwrights to actually be the original authors of all of the Shakespeare work. So as part of this revolutionary method to bring education to the public using theater, and to really evolutionize the English language, so that just by if you listen to Shakespeare, I mean, we don't speak like that now, but there was so much, just the poetry and the words, it's and the science of how it all plays out. It's like you subconsciously learn so much just by really following exactly the Shakespearean way of thinking. So anyway, Francis Bacon being this hidden figure in the art world, but also a very prominent science figure. And the last book that Francis Bacon wrote was called The New Atlantis. And this documentary that Chris showed me about it, which was just this kind of this foreshadowing of what the new world was going to be like, because people were going from Europe to North America, and he was a prominent Freemason. He was, if you look into the conspiracy side of it, he was potentially like one of the Illuminati, and he had, you know, this ancient knowledge and this wisdom carried down for thousands of years. So that's like, was all encoded in the Shakespeare work. But the last book, The New Atlantis, was foreshadowing what this utopian world would be like if we were to like basically let go of all of our European baggage and start new in an enlightenment sense of being that's just in more in harmony with nature. He was pretty sure he was one of the first deists, and the deists were the people that looked at nature and God as one and the same. And a lot of the original founders of the United States were like this too. So Francis Bacon was a key figure in the foundation of this new Western civilization, this reincarnation of civilization that came about. So, I mean, as you know, I'm super fascinated and obsessed at times with Atlantis and this lost civilization, and Francis Bacon. You know, I think like as we talked about that, like it just seemed to be the right word, because Francis Bacon, like in the Shakespeare world, was a poet, and he was also a scientist, and it just made sense that like the main character, this John Lennon resonant rock and roll musician guy, would be the front man of this thing, because Mandala in the story, as Uncle Bruce wrote it, was like this, it was kind of like a modern day, I mean, even though it was based on Genesis, it was as we read it, it was like a modern day Beatles. It was this band that just captivated the world, and specifically Francis Bacon, or Phil Cotter, Francis Bacon, this main guy. It really just like took, it was all about like looking at the story that Uncle Bruce wrote and seeing how it's happening in the real world today. And I want to do another screen share actually of the Mandala script here, of the first page of the Mandala script. And this has always been like the opening page here, and I'll just read it out loud here. Uncle Bruce wrote this. Mandala was conceived in 1981 as a work of fiction. In light of present world affairs and the current sophistication of our biomedical technology, it would now be more appropriate to consider Mandala as presumptive fiction. Suffice it to say that there is more substantial probability of Mandala being real than was feared. Sincerely, Bruce H. Lipton. I get chills just like reading that even now. But that was written in 1981, and like looking at that and developing the story, and like as we adapted it to what we saw, it's like we took that passage to heart. That was kind of like the central thesis of what it meant to adapt the story. Is like, look at the world today from 1981 to now. Like you said, things have changed so much, but it's like, holy shit, Mandala is way more real. Like that has come true so much to the sense of the word than Uncle Bruce probably could have even imagined at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's come a long way in a lot of ways, and in hearing about it, if we would have read that, if we were live back in 81, it would have been like, this seems pretty ridiculous, and it's like a science fiction, basically, like a very futuristic kind of idea. But he's obviously well versed in how science works and vaccines, and knows what's more possible than the layman. But yeah, as time progresses, it is only becoming more and more probable, like you said, and very possible that things like this can happen and might already be happening. Like we have a lot of instances these days in super pop groups and things, and hearing certain tones, and hearing how music is kind of blending into itself. All pop music kind of has certain characteristics and certain tones, and the videos have certain images, and these personas have certain aspects about them, and they're dressed a certain way, and there's just a lot going on that would make you think that something funny is happening. And I think one of the major point was that there's a disease or a flu going around. When Uncle Bruce wrote this script, he wrote the flu that's happening in the script is the swine flu, and that's kind of a catalyst for things in the movie. And I remember when we started writing this, it was 2008, and couple of our buddies read it and they're just like, what, is this a real thing? What is, like, a pig flu? Like, I don't get it. Like, swine flu, what is that? And then it was something happened in the 70s, maybe on a military base. I forgot what Uncle Bruce based it off of. But then a year later, there's a huge fucking swine flu breakout, or maybe 2 years later, I think just a year later, all of a sudden swine flu's everywhere. It's the biggest thing. It's going to kill everybody. There's 1,000 bajillion cases here and there. And it was just like, holy shit, is this really happening right now? And that was just, you know, a year after we started writing it. And then, you know, learning about all the other stuff that's happening is, and how music can manipulate, and lights and frequencies and all this stuff. It's just, it is becoming real, literally. And that's, I feel like that's the biggest kick in our ass right now, is like, we need to make this before it is real. Like, it is 100% real, which might already be that way. And if that's the case, then we need to make it even more, to put out there how it's possible and that it is happening. But either way, it's mirroring real life right now. And it's scary, it's exciting, but it's just it's maddening at the same time. Like, is Uncle Bruce a fucking time traveler? Like, check his fucking passport, bro.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, well, it's funny, if you speak about his passport, he'll tell you this too, because he's got a dual residency in New Zealand. And the actual paperwork for his New Zealand passport, as far as because to get a residency in New Zealand, you got to go through some major loops. You can't be past a certain age, and on the main specifications, he basically couldn't get residency. But based on his reputation and other stuff, which I'm not even sure of all the specifics, but it turned out on his actual paperwork as for New Zealand dual residency, is that he is on paper a unique alien. Because, and it's just like it's that says it all right there. It's like Uncle Bruce has so many amazing, incredible stories that have by all means and measures influenced before and after Mandala, just what the nature of Mandala is all about, and what it comes down to. And what was it? Mandala is just like an amazing breakthrough for the world, and it's happening all right now, and it's definitely scary at times in the synchronicities, but it's like the fact that it's happening all around us right now. It's a developing, unfolding story, and it's like, even though like there's the drive, like we were talking about before, like we need to do something. This movie in itself is activism. We need to do something. There was a time before Mandala even came out that this story came into the public consciousness through the media, and it was the movie Josie and the Pussycats. The movie Josie and the Pussycats has a very spooky little parallel, but the main differences with Josie and the Pussycats compared to Mandala is that Josie and the Pussycats is like, you know, it's a lighthearted chick flick, really. Like there's this mind control aspect that has a lot to do with commercial branding and advertising and using the band to control the masses, and just how the music industry really operates and everything. But it's, you know, very lighthearted and fun. And like when I was in Milwaukee last year with you, and we had this really great breakthrough writing the story, we talked about it then, and we've talked about it before. It's like Mandala, unlike Josie and the Pussycats, is a tragedy. It starts off, you know, like a fun, you know, interesting movie, you know, maybe a light drama in the beginning, but science fiction stuff, but it turns into a fucking tragedy, unlike Josie and the Pussycats. And it's like, as we've written the story, it's like we've gone through some hardships coming up with characters and killing them off and finding ways to kill the characters or end their lives in ways that people don't see coming. So it's funny, like we don't even see it coming. It's like it's happened before, it's incarnated, but this thing is obviously, if it as we believe it's meant to happen, it will unfold in the right way. It's just a matter of us, like on the 11th draft, coming and learning the story, learning our own selves, and applying the lessons we've learned into the movie itself.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, we've grown so much in the time that we've written this, and I feel like you were getting at that Mandala is kind of its own organism. You know, it grows it grows itself, you know, and then we have to learn to see it in a different way, or we have to learn seeing it differently from us being different people and having different experiences. And I've gone through a lot in the last 9 years. You know, I've moved around, had heartbreak, met people, had jobs, left, you know, experienced this, experienced that, been happy, been sad, all that stuff. And I've developed more as a character, and every character in Mandala has developed more. I know you've developed more as a character and as a human being and had more experiences. And then it's like, you know, we come back to it when it's the right time to revisit it. And like the last time we did was when you were in Milwaukee, which was almost exactly a year ago. And it comes to us when we need to. It's always there. You know, I'll open it sometimes on the computer in Final Draft, and then I'll just kind of read it. And then, I don't know, I just can't get myself to put my fingers on the keys, but it exists in itself, and it definitely feels a lot closer to being finished. But I feel like the things that are going to influence it and that do influence it are not finished yet. There's still more. We can only write it so much, I feel like, as we grow and as the world evolves and different things happen. And I think the major change, and I feel like it was really interesting that we almost had our first female president as we were talking about changing the main character from a male to a female, which is a huge thing in a story. Anybody who's heard any story ever, if you change the sex of the main character, it might not change everything, but it does change the dynamic and the perspective of everything, especially in Mandala. From what we know about it and what happens, it really changes the dynamic and how you feel about the story and the world itself. And it was really interesting that we almost had our first female president, but then we fucking didn't. You know, everybody kind of thought that was going to happen, and then we didn't. And it's like, even if she runs again, I still don't think she should win. We don't. As many people, not to get political, but as many people wanted her to win, we don't want her as the first female president. We want somebody else. Barack was a good example of the first non-white president. That's great. He wasn't some fucking game as usual, bullshit asshole, whatever. He was different in a million different ways besides his skin color. And that was great for him to be the first different guy, because he was actually different. Yeah, he did a lot of the same stuff, political, whatever. But I think for as far as having a female president, we want somebody who is somebody else, somebody who's more genuine, somebody like that. And I just think that was that's another, symbolistic kind of parallel that we have with Mandala, is that and then they talk about spiritually, it's shifting from a male energy to a female energy. That's kind of like what's happening in the world right now, is being more, men were more rigid and not emotional and business-like, and, just doing things because that's what the right thing to do is, and not really listening to our feelings. Whereas female energy typically involves more being in touch with yourself and listening and caring and feeling. And I feel like that's a perfect transition of what's happening in the world as well as in Mandala. And it kind of unlocked a lot of doors for us in Mandala of just switching it. It was just kind of like, I remember when he told me that night, like I had never even thought about it for a millisecond to change the sex of the main character from male to female. But as soon as you told me, it was just like, that makes perfect sense. That's absolutely beautiful. It makes the story so much better. It allows us to do so many different things, and it just made a lot of sense. And I kind of feel like we're kind of waiting for that evolution to the female energy in Mandala, which is slowly happening, and then in the world, which is also slowly happening. Just the voice of the femininity is kind of, the goddess is coming back, as I think I've heard people say, which is a great thought. Even though it ends in tragedy, it's great to have the female perspective on things.
Absolutely. I mean, even with The Force Awakens and the new Star Wars movie, having the main characters being a female and an African American, just like for what it was, just by them being who they were and just those characters, it communicated a whole nother message. And it's funny, when we were, when we were in New York City on that same trip before going to Milwaukee, hanging out with my sister Kim and having that conversation, and she had a lot of really good insight and just feedback upon changing it into a female character and just getting to know the female character. And it was when we were in Milwaukee, we did that read through of Mandala for the first time in however many years in the same place. That re-listening to that, not, you know, however many months ago it was I gotta do it again, just because it was so much fun listening to us do that story, because first of all, we're great friends, and it just reminded me just like of just our connection and our ability to communicate in the way that we do. We don't always have to explain everything, and just we learned so much just by doing that read through after making all those changes, like learning that it was a female character. And then we had just watched Independence Day 2, which was the classic example of how to not write a movie, and just like a hilarious fucking experience watching that. And then reading Mandala and seeing in our own way, like, okay, what doesn't work? It's very obvious what doesn't work, what needs to change. And one of the things, like leading back to the main character and having it be a female, and what Kim, my sister, was saying, was just like how you really got to know the characters and how females are. I mean, and my sister said this, it's like, bitches be crazy. Bitches be crazy. And it's like, that just opened, it's like, we know what it's like to, you know, be crazy ourselves. And also just like, it's just to hear like a woman even say that, just to validate that, not no offense to women being, not saying women are crazy, but like, in a way, it's just like, oh my God, there's so much we don't know about this character. And the way that we had Francis Bacon developed in the story was like very much it's like lack of development. It's like Francis Bacon, the main character, was like this very, you know, for all intents and purposes, a one-dimensional character. And it's not necessarily because we didn't do too much thinking about it. It's just, I feel like we kind of assumed that, you know, like what Francis Bacon should be, which is just like this rock god who is like this Zen being who, you know, and it is the most fundamental part of the story as we have developed it, but in a way, and like a Zen character, like a Buddha or a Muhammad or a Jesus or whatever, it's like they're obviously got a lot of substance and character, but like we kind of, it almost like took that for granted, and it didn't show in the story. And by changing it into a female character, just like with my sister saying bitches be crazy, it's like, man, it's like, we got to get to know this girl. We got to get to know this woman. And there's so much more depth that can come from I think from a female character, and what a woman has to go through in this world, especially being in the music industry, being at the whim of the producers and like what their messages, what their struggles are and everything. And like you said, coming back to this, like the feminine and this, like this sacred feminine, even when I was at the Unity concert this past weekend, that was a very strong message that came about from all of the Lakota elders, was about honoring the feminine and it's sacred, and how that's coming back in a strong way. So it made so much sense coming full circle, going from the male to the female, and realizing that like once we did that, there was so much more depth. Like you said, like the doors were unlocked, and we just suddenly saw this whole new aspect of things. And it's funny that Mandala thing was on a door. So it's like, you know, you open it up, it's a closet, but that thing is like as good as the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You go through that door, and it's a fucking mandala to the next world.
Exactly. I was just thinking, yeah, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, same idea. And also, there were a couple of times that I took my closet doors off in the house, if you remember, and I put them in the living room and played the 2001 Space Odyssey music. So doors are also monoliths as well. So.
Yep. Oh my God, that was so much fun, dude. Coming home from class. It's just like for all the listeners out there, I came home from school one day. It was totally random, and all the lights were off. But the blasting on the stereo system in the living room was the monolith music from 2001 Space Odyssey, and just walking inside, and you had propped the door just like standing up in the middle of the living room. It's like that was like so many great moments in college and at that house that were so unique to our own experiences, but like that was so one of them. And it just like, you know, brings the lightheartedness, because it's like, if we're not going to have fun with this, what's the point? And even though it's a tragedy ultimately in this story of Mandala, it's like, you know, we're taking it too seriously taking it too seriously without realizing that. It's like, you know, the stories like that and moments like that are really just give it the substance and the character that we don't even know.
I agree, and it's also part of life, right? You know, we were talking about that before. You were saying what one of the things that you were told or that was bestowed upon you is that we have more things as humans in common than we do differences. So like you're talking about, you know, we focus on the everything that's different about us, but really we have way more things in common than we don't. And I think the main ones are that we were born and we die. Yeah, we have that in common with a lot of things, but you know, that'll happen. And ultimately in between, you know, we've both had experiences recently that have kind of brought us brought us out from all the petty bullshit that we deal with in everyday life and getting worked up on this. And I work in the service industry, so there are a million times a day where I could get worked up and upset about this person being rude or a coworker not doing the right thing or me forgetting to do something. And there are a lot of opportunities for me to get upset about something that it doesn't need it. That's not warranted. And then having this perspective of these things happen, which, you know, tragedies or half tragedies or things that are on that road that give you perspective and like what's really important, you know, even though Mandala is a tragedy, but we're creating this story. And it's good to remember what's important and what's real. Like when you're looking back, I told you I try to think about, you know, not necessarily on my deathbed, but as a grandpa sitting somewhere, what will I regret? You know, what will I be happy that I did? What will I be proud of? You know, and a lot of it comes down to the moments. You know, I'm sure I'll look back on us doing these things. However, no matter how many we do, if this is the last one we do, or if we do 1,000 more, it's like I'll always really be pleased that we did this because it's always a positive thing to me. And keeping that positivity and brushing off the things that really don't matter and kind of learning what does matter and what is a big deal and what isn't a big deal. It's a lot of value, and I feel like it adds years to your life if you can kind of brush off stuff that's not a big deal. I feel like I know a couple of people who are they're losing years, they're losing minutes off their life because everything kind of takes them to the ultimate stress level, and it's like I can tell them as much as I want till I'm blue in the face that, you know, this isn't really that big of a deal. I know it seems like it right now, and I'm not going to pretend like I know what it's like to be inside your consciousness, but it's really, you know, not that big of a deal. And then sometimes later they come back and they're like, you were right, or sometimes they just stay in that mode. But it's good to remember to, if you can, you know, remember the things that make you happy and kind of take everything with a grain of salt. And
you know, and that's on that note, that with that, what you just said there is a lot like what the essence of Jeff's character is like just being present in the moment, just taking things with a grain of salt. And I think that up till like maybe like the more current years, Jeff's character, who in the drafts of Mandala is the best friend of Francis Bacon, or our female lead character now, and obviously things may change in terms of name, gender, whatever, but those are all pieces that can change. But Jeff was like the Rock, who, not like Dwayne Johnson the Rock, but like maybe maybe not gonna throw it out. Hey, apparently he's gonna run for president, so maybe that's, I don't know, who knows. But yeah, like Jeff's character, who we always envisioned as Jack Black as we were writing this, or as we were developing the story, and that was, I think, we put more development into Jeff as a character than we ever did with Francis Bacon, because it's like ultimately that's, like you were saying, like that's the ultimate learning lesson. That's like the real wisdom. We always saw Francis Bacon as like the Buddha character, but now in retrospect, Jeff was obviously the Buddha character. Jeff was the one who was like living life in reality. Francis Bacon was like the rock star who was living in their own artistic mind and universe and everything. And it's amazing to see that's like that's really where we are right now. And it's like what we're talking about is like a character who is swept along this this experience and goes through the motions and has like a true arc that is present in the mind, you know. And it's like and when we go through experiences like even we talked about in previous episodes with 9/11, you know, talking about talk blue to the face somebody about 9/11, for example, you know, just which was yesterday. It's like, you know, that may or may not have the effect that you desire to have. It's like you want somebody to wake up, and ultimately Mandala is all about, we want to incite this waking up process, even though there's this massive mind control, putting people to sleep part of it. It's really about like hello, like wake up, like bring us to reality. And Jeff's character taking that life as it comes and being swept along this thing and struggling with the conspiracy of it all, because in Mandala there's this conspiracy that unfolds. As much as things are in a regular, you know, it's like, oh, we're in a band and we got signed and we're going to go on tour and it's going to be great. There's somebody Jeff who starts to see things maybe for not what they really are. Like we were talking about before the show about my experience at Uplift in Australia, this festival or this concert thing, and the first year being part of this inner circle and having a more subjective point of view, being with the presenters and having this healing love fest experience. But then the second year being in this objective point of view where I was literally outside the circle filming it, seeing things through a filter. And that's when you start to see things. And Jeff's character really resonates with that. It's like Jeff is able to see the Mandala experience and the show and the things that Francis Bacon goes through, or a female character, from the outside perspective. And I think that character resonates a lot with what people are going through right now. You know, going on the internet and looking up all sorts of stuff. We're talking about conspiracy theories. It's like sometimes they can be so incomprehensible as like reptilian airships gassing the population. It's like, well, what are you going to do with that? But still, like with the internet, we are bombarded with information. There's so much information. What do you do with it? And Jeff's character really goes through the motions of that, has awakenings, is really attached to it, then has to let go. And it's interesting, like that was our real main, like he wasn't even the main character, but he was the one that, as we were in college going through that ourselves, I guess subconsciously we just gravitated towards that experience the most, and it really drove the story.
Yeah, he's the everyman. You know, when I was writing it, I would always think it was kind of hard for me to split up how to write the characters, because they always say, write what you know. So obviously every character you ever write is a part of yourself. Well, when I was writing Jeff, he was always a combination of you and I, you know, but a lot of the passion was from you, as people can tell just by seeing you talk. You're a very passionate guy. And that's kind of why we chose Jack Black, just his characters and various things. He's animated and he's passionate about stuff. So that was always in mind when thinking about him, and it was easiest to write him, I think, for us and to talk about him, because we were so much like him. We were going through a similar thing. He was in like a microcosm of it. Like he was going through it in a couple of months, you know, like for the one conspiracy, whereas we were like going through it for a couple of years and like the grand conspiracy, but we were still very excited about it, into it. And basically everybody was our Francis Bacon. We were like trying to tell everybody about it, and like, you know, we're like, oh, this is happening, we just saw this, you got to believe me. And everyone's like, okay, yeah, you guys are just kind of in your own world, but I appreciate that, you know. And that's kind of how Jeff is. So it was really easy for us to kind of get into Jeff's mind, because Jeff's mind was our mind. So I feel like he's probably the most human character and the most developed character, like you were saying, that we have, for sure, because of what he was going through and because of what we were going through and what we are going through. And then maybe we'll need to bring in, like you said, your sister. It was great to have her perspective on the female character. Yeah, Bitches is crazy, but Bitches is also provide a very different perspective, and they also bring things from an angle that I never think about. You know, whenever I have encounters or relationships with females, it's like it's hard for me to see things from their perspective. And that doesn't make it invalid. It doesn't make my perspective invalid, but it's different. It's as close to alien I think, as it gets for a man, is trying to figure out what the fuck a female's thinking, and probably vice versa. But I think that's exciting for us in writing a female character, but we might have to bring in a little bit of perspective and help just from somebody else. But yeah, it's great. And we're talking about activism and like what's more effective and what's the best way to do it. And some people are out yelling, and some people are throwing rocks, and some people are writing papers, some people are writing emails, some people are writing 45-verse songs. And I think we realize what our form of activism is. After standing out on the corner with Who is Ron Paul sign in 2007, we figured that making this movie, making Mandala, is our form of protest and our form of activism. It works on a deeper level. We are trying to make it work on a deeper level and kind of wake up people in that way, because we've experienced that kind of yelling in people's faces is not really effective most of the time, or even being too direct. Artists who are too direct is kind of like has a different, it doesn't really necessarily work all the time, I think, when people are too direct, but sometimes it does, and sometimes you could be too abstract and the point doesn't really get across. And I think we're aiming to walk that line with Mandala, to kind of awaken subconscious stuff and also paint this picture to make people think a little bit differently. Like, I just watched The Matrix last night for the first time in a while with somebody who had never seen it. So watching it from that perspective, like, we all kept, like, three of us had seen it, and then the one person had not seen it. So we were all like, every time something happened, we were like, oh, are you watching this? Like, is this blowing your mind right now? Because we know the effect it had on us. That was 18 years ago now, and we're all in our 20s or 30s. But it had a profound effect on a deeper level, I think. And I think that's what we're trying to accomplish with Mandala. Like, that's our form of activism. We're thinking about the characters and the story development in that way, in that vein of, like, painting these characters, Jeff being people like us, and all the other characters representing other people, and, like, having people identify. My mom always says when she goes to movies, she's like, well, if I identified with a character, I was way more into it, So she's like, oh, I love this character, and when this happened to him, I felt it, and I love the movie because of it. So it's like, the goal is to make all these characters and be able to reach as many people as possible and have everybody relate to at least some aspect of it, take them on this journey, and then give them a new perspective about what's happening, maybe make them feel a little shit on the way there. That's our objective as an artist, is to kind of manipulate people's feelings, but that's the kind of power that we like to have. Everybody likes to project their powers on people, but mostly along the way to kind of present a new perspective gently and in a way that people can understand. Like we always talk about, I love that your metaphor for Mandala is an on-ramp.
I was just, that was just wanted to bring that up exactly. And being that, like, as far as an on-ramp goes, what is an on-ramp? An on-ramp is something that allows you to get up to speed to the highway from a slower road, like a regular main road. And the thing is, Mandala, and even more so the deeper mythos and philosophy that we're getting at with Mandala, that we've learned and have been learning and still continue to learn from Uncle Bruce and other leaders and spiritual people and the internet and David Wilcock, everything ourselves, all that stuff. It's like a highway that, like, our lives and the way we've seen it, like when we talked about coming into college, it was like we had this small town with roads going at 25 to 30 miles an hour, and we move in certain ways or stop and go and speed bumps and this and that, and you drive by the fire department, oh, that's where the fair was, oh, I remember the fair. It's like you're familiar with all this stuff. But then college comes and all of this learning with the internet and everything we've gone through, it's like this highway that is suddenly like comes right through our main town, and it's going, I would like to say, 88 miles an hour, to bring up the Back to the Future reference. It's like you're going beyond it's like there's this highway that goes beyond the infinite. That's the speed limit, beyond the infinite, the ultimate Autobahn, the Mandala Bahn. and we, as we've developed Mandala, I mean, that's really what we focused on a lot. But over the course of our experience in college, we loosely developed Mandala as part of a trilogy, that this was the beginning part of a story, because like we said, Mandala is a tragedy, but we're not, even though our directive as filmmakers or storytellers is to manipulate and feelings and provide experiences, it's not our goal to put people into a sadness, or we don't want to like invoke tragedy. We want to wake people up to the tragedy that the entire course of human civilization has been, even being at the Unity concert and all the stuff with the Native Americans. America itself is founded on a tragedy, and we don't even really acknowledge it. So Mandala is like this perfect opportunity to like wake people up to the tragedy that our whole experience has been up to this point. But that's just the beginning. As much as it's the end, it's the beginning at the same time. So there was like 2 other movies that we wanted to kind of, as much as we want to wake people up, okay, now that we're awake, what do we do about it? And like you brought up the Matrix, once you take the red pill and you realize it's the Matrix, then you come back in and out, and then, okay, then what? Okay, now you can learn how to reprogram your subconscious, or you can reprogram it. So like Keanu Reeves learns Kung Fu, now that he knows the Matrix and how it works, and he's got Morpheus to help him, he can learn things like that. So now, and then he learns stuff, and then it's like by the 3rd Matrix movie, and even just a deeper understanding of the philosophy of the Matrix, now that you've woken up and you've learned how to reprogram, what is the finale? And the finale, ultimately, I would argue, is to return to the source. And that's what Neo has to do, is he's the one, and the whole reason that things are the way they are is because he exists, so he has to return to the source. It's like the 99%, 1%, the all-seeing eye. You got the bulk of the pyramid, the little capstone that's missing at the top. Neo's like that capstone. It's all about coming back to that one point. So we wanted to tell, like, Mandala is like that opening part, waking people up, and the reprogramming, and then it's becoming whole again. So it's interesting that Mandala, like Mandala starts off like any other movie that, we wanted to make it as familiar as possible. And that's kind of how it is, the way Uncle Bruce wrote it in his treatment. It's a story about a rock band. And even in the first drafts, and as it will continue to be, it's just about a band and about these buddies and their experiences, life experiences that happen. But then this conspiracy unfolds, that there's shit going on that seems so unreal at first, but then like things start to happen that really just like drive this stake into your beliefs. It's like, oh my God, this is real. And now it's like, what do I do about it? And that's like the problem or the challenge that our main character, Francis Bacon, or a female lead character, has to deal with. It's okay, now it's like the ball is in my court. What am I going to do with this? It's like the activism thing. So like this highway that comes in at 88 miles an hour, Mandala starts off right in that, okay, up to speed. Like we're just in going the same type of stuff that we're familiar with, the same type of friends, the same type of experiences, but then it brings you right up to speed. So it's like by the end of the movie, you literally gun it to 88 and you're going beyond the infinite. So it's like, it's not a tragedy like, what's that movie, House of Sand and Fog with Ben Kingsley, where like everyone dies in the end. Well, in a way, yes, but that's like, it's not like, it doesn't just leave you feeling shitty. It leaves you feeling shitty with like a drive and a purpose. Like, oh my God, like now that I know, I got to do something about this. It's like we want people leaving with knowledge. We want to wake people up to the reality of the situation, but to realize, like Uncle Bruce's, again, like since he wrote the original story, it talks about being a victim. You realize that's like through the biology belief, it's like, yes, we've been programmed with this belief that we are victims. But now that you know that, and you know the science behind epigenetics and that we're not victims, now you have the power to reprogram and learn Kung Fu and change the reality. So that's the on-ramp. That's the thing. It's like we start you off where you think you're familiar, but then you come up to speed, but then you realize that you have the power. It's a tragedy, but then it's like the natural inclination. It's like if something's going wrong in your life, you want to change it. If you're unhappy, you want to become happy. If you're running out of air, if you're drowning, you want to get up above the surface so that you can get some air. So that's what Mandala starts off swimming, and then you're drowning, and then you want to get some fucking air.
Exactly, dude. And I feel like in the spirit of Mandala, I feel like we should cut things off there. I feel like we've done well. We've said enough. We've said maybe not enough, maybe a little bit too much, but I feel like that's a perfect place to end things. We just reached 88. Now the rest is up to you.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought that up. We're actually at the top of the hour, and I've made a mental note of the last thing I wanted to say while we started talking in terms of mandalas. When I was in Australia for the first Uplift concert, there was a bunch of Tibetan Buddhist monks that were going on tour, so to speak, around the world doing traditional mandalas. And a real mandala, in the sense of the Buddhist thing, is they take sand and they create this beautiful, takes like a few days to make a very prayer oriented artistic design of a mandala out of sand, and there's prayer going on. It's just like this beautiful thing made of sand that they do very intentionally. At the very end, they do their chanting, and it's this, and at the mandala, at the Uplift concert, the mandala that they made synchronistically in 2013, which was the year of the snake in China, the mandala itself was the mandala of life and death. And that's the thing. It's like if you look at a snake shedding its skin, and the wisdom like of a snake being able to have that, like the Ouroboros, like the snake eating its tail. There's this infinity loop going on. So the thing about a mandala is that they take all this time to make this beautiful representation of the universe. But then what do you do with it? It's not like a Picasso painting where they take it and they sell it and it goes on somebody's wall. No, the final part of the practice is that they take it and they take these little like mini brooms, and they just sweep all of the sand into a pile on top of this table that they made the mandala. This beautiful, beautiful learning lesson is not permanent. It's temporary. And it's in a completion part of the process. A mandala, as a part of it, is completion. And it's this life and death thing. It has its life, it comes, its arc, and then they sweep it up into a pile. And then just like Bill and Ted, it's just dust in the wind, dude. That's all that was. So it's like life. Life gives us experiences, but we have to remember that it's temporary. And we have to be present. And we have to take the opportunity and learn from this experience, but not, and to learn to let it go. It's like holding on to this learning lesson, but letting go of the physical nature of this whole thing. So again, thank you for reminding me that it's just the top of the hour, and that's exactly what this is. It's a learning lesson, a beginning and an end. We take it, we hold on, and we let go.
Fucking exactly, man. Articulated very well, as always. That was perfect. A brilliant ending to this. Thanks for having me on again, man. I'm glad we can do this. Round 3, let's keep it going. I appreciate the talks as always.
Yes, me too. And for everyone out there, we'll be posting this on YouTube, and we'll look forward to your insight. I want to give a shout out to all of our good friends. We mentioned Jeremy and Mike Mayer. Also want to mention Corey. Corey, we love you. You're a good man, and we're excited to work with you more. Just wanted to let you know, Corey, if you're watching. All right, brother John.
I love you, Story. I just want Story Time to know that I love him too, and I appreciate it if he's watching. And I'll see you soon, Mr. Bonjour.
All right, brother. I'll talk to you soon. Peace up, everybody. Keep it simple.